As you all probably know, I'm Vicki Wilkins, and this is Mimi Johnston. Thank you all for being here today. We know it was raining this morning, but I think it's gone and pushed out. Let's give Mike a round of applause for the golf cart rides this morning. I know it's a difficult job because I had to do it last week, so I appreciate you being here today. I'm glad I didn't have to do it in the rain because that wouldn't have been fun. So today we will be talking about global security and intelligence, how it has a profound effect on both national and international relations. We are honored to have Dr. Olga Bertelsen with us today to discuss how political violence, covert operations, and disinformation influence the U.S. and the rest of the world. Before we begin, we always like to thank our sponsors who make this series possible. Our presenting sponsor, Andrew Kaltnow. Can you flip it for me? Thank you. Our gold sponsors, the Seneca Regional Chamber of Commerce and Destination Seneca County and Klaus Construction. Our silver sponsors, Mercy Health Tiffin and Dr. Robert Dornauer, DDS. And our friends at Life at TU, the Allen Erie Senior Center, AVI Food Systems, Brenda Collins, Edward Jones, Elaine Daughtry, Chris Lee, Hannah Luring, and Rachel Tate, the Rotary Club of Tiffin Foundation, the law firm of Lang, Gordon, Rannigan, and Klaus, and the Tiffin Women in Action.
Thank you, Vicki. We're so pleased to have Dr. Bertelsen with us today for this important session. Prior to joining Tiffin University in 2021, Dr. Bertelsen practiced medicine and dental surgery in Ukraine and earned her bachelor and doctoral degrees in history with a focus on Soviet Russian history and intelligence at both American and British universities. She has taught and conducted research at Columbia University, the University of Toronto, Harvard University and New York University, the European University Institute in Florence, Italy, and Embry-Riddle Aeronautical Institute in Prescott, Arizona. So she didn't sit on her laurels too long. With special interest in Ukrainian and Russian history and intelligence, Dr. Bertelsen's research focuses on political violence, bioterrorism, covert action, counterintelligence, and U.S. national and global security. She is the author and editor of 5 books and a great number of book chapters and articles that explore the issues of genocidal practices, state violence, U.S. national and global security, and Russian covert operations of ideological subversion. Her scholarship is grounded in empirical and archival research that she conducts in the United States and Europe, including the former KGB archives. Dr. Bertelsen is a recipient of numerous prestigious national and international awards and does consulting and collaborative work with both governmental and private intelligence agencies. She has spoken at many international conferences, forums, and assemblies, including the United Nations. She actively engages her students in her research and publication activities, and her graduate students have been employed by the U.S. Department of State and think tanks in the U.S., Geneva, Brussels, and Toronto. Please give a warm Life at TU welcome to Dr. Olga Bertelsen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mimi. I'll try to carry this stuff. Okay. It's easier. Good morning, dear friends. Good morning, dear colleagues. You can recognize my Ukrainian accent immediately, probably, so I hope you will understand me, and I will try to articulate well enough. But let me start with some small addition. I was born in Kharkiv, and Mimi, thank you very much for this introduction. Kharkiv is on the map. And my heart bleeds every time when I go there because I have to go still to Kharkiv, to Ukraine, to conduct my research. I'm going there on a mission at least 4 or 5 times a year, so twice per semester. And unfortunately, my home city absolutely has been destroyed. So the downtown is unrecognizable. And today I would like to address this particular topic that you see on the screen through the prism of my research and publications, which is Russian intelligence, Russian operations of ideological subversion, and this topic is quite popular right now because if we think about international global security, U.S. Security, unfortunately, Russian disinformation is on everybody's mental map, meaning of intel professionals, of politicians, etc., etc. So let me begin, and I don't know if I can change it. Yes, I can, I guess. Let me break this particular talk into 3 parts. So during the first session, I will discuss, first of all, the Russian influence operations and operations of ideological subversion and how they're dangerous for the United States and, generally speaking, for the West. And then I will probably give you just a quick historical sort of survey of what it is, because you hear perhaps this term over and over again, ideological subversion, Russian disinformation, but sometimes we are not sure what it is. So I would like to make a historical foray a little bit so that you know where it came from. But first, and then we will, during our second session, I will try to be more specific and address this particular problem of Russian disinformation, Russian operations of ideological subversion through a very interesting, one of those interesting aspects of this problem, which is the operations among our intellectual elites, meaning Western scholars, American scholars, because we are systematically, constantly, routinely invited to advise our politicians. We talk a lot with those people who represent our U.S. intel community, so they're listening to us. And unfortunately, there are people who, among us, meaning in the United States, who are heavily influenced by Russian disinformation. Some of them, sadly, they are working for the Russians. So I will, during our second session, I will address this specific question, Russian operations among our intellectual elites. And then, of course, a very natural question might emerge, and I'll try to answer this question: what should we do about it? Because we can speculate potentially what can happen if everybody in our country is somehow ideologically subverted by the Russians, but we have to do something about it, and I have specific propositions in this respect, so you might ask me some questions. I will try to decode at the end of our second session, but let's start. So first, let me just mention three documents that are very important for our conversation because they were issued by the Russian Federation. They became law in the Russian Federation, and it's all about us. It's all about the West. So the first document, maybe they might additionally explain why this topic is important for us as a community. So first document is Putin's order, which was issued in March 2023. And this document is all about new Russian foreign policy. First of all, he identified the United States and other European states which are part of NATO as hostile countries, and he proposed in this particular document to exploit the vulnerability of our country and of the countries of Europe. So then he suggested in this document that we have to adopt a comprehensive approach to cyber operations, meaning that we have to spread our disinformation through a variety of methods, which are, of course, the internet, but they use social media platforms, they use front organizations, and cyber plays a big role in this particular operations. And, of course, the target is the intellectual elite of the West, and more specifically of the United States. And then, no surprise there, the third major point of this document is to deepen collaboration with the states of Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, meaning those states that are still supporting the Russian Federation's foreign policy, and plus, of course, Russia's war in Ukraine. And again, there is no surprise there who are today those allies of the Russian Federation. A lot of states in the Middle East, including Iran, North Korea, etc., etc. So we are observing a very interesting phenomenon when the Russian Federation was sort of ostracized, and the West, for the most part, sort of stopped having any communication with the Russian Federation for understandable reasons. But at the same time, now the Russian Federation gravitates toward those authoritarian regimes and is absolutely happy when they are sort of want to maintain diplomatic relations and supporting Russia's foreign policy. Another document appeared immediately, several days after Putin issued his new foreign policy. This document, actually it was a classified document, and it was leaked, not to the press, but at least our press picked it up somehow immediately. I don't know what the source was, but the Washington Post, I think it happened in June this year, they published this particular document, classified document, that was issued by the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So in this document, actually, Lavrov, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Russia, he sort of enforced and reinforced Putin's policy, all the talking points, etc. And what is interesting that he specifically suggested that we should identify several entities, or rather individuals, who would be responsible for all these sort of operations that Russia embarked on. Let me just say a few words about this particular classified document, which was declassified through some kind of leak. But who is responsible, actually? The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Russian embassies all over the world, Russian front organizations in the West, and we will discuss what it means, front organizations, including in the United States, and Russian intelligence agencies. The abbreviation that I would operate, and I will repeat over and over again, is the CVR and the FSB, which means external and, in English, external and internal secret services. So more specifically, the individuals who are responsible for these operations are, and by the way, all of them today are war criminals, because they were present at Putin's National Security Council. They all voted for invasion, supporting Putin's sort of proposition to invade Ukraine. So number one, Sergei Naryshkin, we have to know those faces. Sergei Naryshkin is the director of the CVR. Sergei Lavrov, that I mentioned already, he is the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs. And finally, Alexander Bortnikov, who is the director of the FSB. So these individuals are responsible for those operations on American soil and in the countries of NATO, and also, of course, in the countries of Europe. The third document that I mentioned is the new doctrine, nuclear doctrine that was formulated by Vladimir Putin, in order to compare what they had before and what they have now, I will say only one thing. Before any attack on the Russian Federation, meaning serious attack, would provoke a nuclear disaster, they would respond. So that's basically the major point of his old nuclear doctrine, which was formulated in 2020. The new nuclear doctrine, it was just sort of adopted in September 2024. It's fresh. I would say it has been expanded. Expanded in what particular way? So even an attack by Ukrainian drones might provoke a nuclear response from the Russian Federation. But I would immediately make a sort of a comment here, so please don't be scared, don't be frightened, because probably we have to understand that this is a rhetorical tool. Putin values his life. He loves his life. He loves his lifestyle. He will probably, likely, I cannot exclude anything because all it takes one lunatic in the Kremlin to have a disaster. But nevertheless, he understands that any nuclear exchange likely would lead to his physical extermination. So 99% of chances that probably, likely, he's not going to use the nuclear weapons. Is not, because our director of the CIA already warned him, and by the way, this particular dialogue was included in a very interesting book that was published by Bob Woodward, right? War, maybe you heard about this. A dialogue between Burns, who is the director of the CIA, and Putin. Before he invaded Ukraine, he said, if you try to use the nuke, so there will be serious consequences. So he has been warned. We don't know what our future brings, but still, I just think that this particular doctrine is a response to the West's ability to help Ukraine, the West's desire to finally finish this war, and it is, for me, it's more a rhetorical tool, sort of a tool of intimidation, if you will. But clearly, verbally at least, he expanded his nuclear doctrine, no doubt about it. Now, it's another interesting sort of fact that I have to mention here so that we understand actually the seriousness of the situation. The Russian Federation will increase its military spending by almost 30%. This is still a draft budget, but still we have to realize that they're not going to quit. So there are no signs of any attempt on the part of Putin to stop the war. And you might ask me, where does the money come from? The money comes from his sales of oil, and unfortunately the sanctions that we imposed and the European states imposed on the Russian Federation, they do not work, unfortunately, because Putin found a lot of schemes, a lot of sort of interesting ways of how he can avoid this impact of our sanctions. And I might elaborate on that at the end if you have a question about this, how he specifically does this. So this is real. I mean, the threat is very real, and we understand that probably something has to be done about it, because we remember, and historians remember, and they remind us over and over again that probably it's not a very good idea to adopt FDR's point when policy of appeasement. You remember, they probably read about this, about the Munich conference in 1938, when Hitler was already was about to take Czechoslovakia, so part of it, and we adopted what? An isolationist policy approach, and we entered the war anyway. I'm not suggesting that we have to enter this war, but what I'm trying to suggest, that we have to somehow to contribute to Ukraine's success, because Ukraine is just the epicenter of this particular conflict in Europe, but we have to understand that Putin is waging his war against us. His main goal is the United States. We are still a very powerful state, and our military is one of the most powerful military in the world. He doesn't like it, clearly. For some reason, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, now, Russia's priorities in the West. As I mentioned before, who are those targets? The military, the political, the intellectual elites, but I will tell you, all of us, ordinary people, if we address this specific question about the United States, who are those people who he is targeting? All of us, ordinary people, because Putin believes that through this ideological subversion, he can influence our choices. He can shape our psyches. He can shape our ideologies, our worldviews, and we will vote in a certain way that would be probably favorable to the Russian Federation. So we have to be alert, aware of this particular idea. And the objective is, of course, I would say, to increase, or to achieve, rather, the sort of superiority of the Russian Federation, if you will, in all spheres. Political, economic, cultural, and this is a danger. And this operations, by the way, has another term. You have to sort of probably be aware of this term because it's all over the press. Active measures. So from his perspective, they are still active measures because he is a person of the KGB. There is a saying that you cannot be a former KGB officer. If you were part of the KGB, you remain a KGB person forever. So he is, this term is stuck in his head, and he operates with this particular term, active measures, which are actually operations of ideological subversion. And we will talk about them in a second. Just a little sort of note, a mental note perhaps. If you think about intelligence, generally speaking, so probably in many people's minds, it's all about James Bond's operations, spies, human intelligence. So I can assure you it's not exactly accurate, because all those Bond stuff, popular stuff, something that we see in our films in Hollywood, it's probably, it constitutes only 15% of all operations that you can imagine. But 85% approximately, it's all about operations of ideological subversion. There is another word or term for that, psychological warfare. Or perhaps what else can be used? Ideological subversion, psychological warfare, or non-conventional warfare. So, and later I will explain what it means and what it includes actually, what kind of practical measures are there. Now, let me just say a few words about the history of ideological subversion. Okay, I'm trying. It doesn't want. Too far, right? No, we're good. Just a moment, just sometimes it doesn't work. Guys? Okay, we're jumping back and forth, but it's okay. So, for the sake of the terminology, I don't know, just maybe I'm doing something wrong, but for the sake of this terminology, who actually familiarized us with this particular, with this particular term, ideological subversion, and who made us aware, in the United States, what the Russians were doing back then, when we had this Cold War. So, a very famous individual, Yuri Bezmenov, he defected to the West, I think in the late 1970s, and he was the first KGB officer who was involved in this particular operations. He designed them, and he kind of was disillusioned with the whole thing, and generally speaking, with the Soviet Union, and he escaped first, I believe, to Canada. Then he was in love with the United States. He believed that this is the last land back then of democracy in the world, and we have to maintain this particular status. So he explained everything. Thank you so much. Okay, this one, okay. We actually are very grateful to him, because why is it important? It happened, 50 years ago, or 40 or 50. So, but I'll tell you, unfortunately, or fortunately for us, because we know how they operate, the KGB uses the same approach over and over again, because this is basically the blueprint for their operations of ideological subversion. So what are they? And I'm following the steps of Bezmenov, and I'm trying to quickly to sort of decode these particular stages that he suggested are in place, because it's a lengthy process. It's not one operation and we did it, we are done with that. No, it's a lengthy process that is designed for decades, actually. So the first phase or step of any operation is the stage of demoralization. It can or might potentially last for 15-20 years. And what does it include, or what does it imply? I believe that's what it takes to raise a generation of students in any country, to indoctrinate them, to turn them against their own country. And there is a very subtle border or boundary between criticism that we all have, meaning toward our government or about any political aspect of our lives, and between hatred. So, and it's a very subtle approach which involves a lot of people, for the most part, Western intellectuals, American elite, scholars, those people professors who teach our students. So it's just a very dangerous stage. Why? Because if you already manage to succeed in this particular step, there is no way back. You have to wait, or to do something about it and wait for another 15-20 years to have a new generation of people who think differently, who were raised differently, who were educated differently. The second stage is the stage of destabilization. It takes from 2 to 5 years. What does it mean? In this particular respect, when the Russians targeted our critical areas, meaning major areas actually of activities, economy, defense systems, and international relations. This stage is reasonably brief in contrast to the first stage because it's easier to do by sending people who would undermine those systems, the ideology of those people who work in these three areas, so because they were already prepared for the next step, and it's reasonably brief. Then the idea is to bring the country, the target country, to on the verge of crisis. What does it mean? Foment a revolution, perhaps help some kind of internal forces that are organizations or movements to challenge the regime in a very violent way. So, and it might take from 4 to 6 weeks. Again, a briefer, a shorter stage. And finally, if all these stages are successful, there will be another stage that follows the stage of normalization. What does it mean? When there is a puppet regime was installed already in place, and actually this puppet regime does whatever Russia says, or back then the Soviet Union says him or her to do. So that's basically what Bezmenov suggested, and sadly we observe the same approach, and we know that they exactly follow the scheme, meaning all those intelligence agencies in the Russian Federation, the CVR, the FSB, etc., etc. So now, in more practical terms, what does it mean? Operations of ideological subversion or psychological warfare. So first, it's of course propaganda, disinformation, subversive activities. So it can be accomplished through the creation of front organizations on American soil. What does it mean, front organizations? So they might pretend that they might be sort of a cultural center or a center of, that is designed to promote some kind of cultural awareness or diversity, etc., etc. But in reality, they are working for the FSB. So we have plenty of them, unfortunately, and I will say a few words about this, in the United States and actually all over the world. The second is, of course, intelligence, counterintelligence, which involves what? All those maybe 15% of operations, they're sending here spies. They gather information about our political sort of landscape, cultural landscape, social landscape, counterintelligence operations, cyber war, something that I already mentioned. Then also they broadly use paramilitary organizations or forces rather, or non-governmental actors, religious leaders, etc., to persuade people and to shape perhaps their worldviews. If we're talking about paramilitary organizations, think about Syria or Ukraine, part of Europe, in which Putin pretended that we, as the Russian Federation, we're not fighting there. Some kind of people are fighting that they're not affiliated with us precisely. The most famous example is the Wagner group that doesn't exist anymore, but still, the use of paramilitary operations, or forces rather, is just, we have to know about this, and they might use this at some point on our American soil. Terrorist tactics, cleansing operations, Ukraine right now is the best example. Assassinations, by the way, here just again a brief comment. I heard a rumor and it was just a rumor, that there is a certain agreement between Russian intel and American intel that you are not touching our people in your country, we're not touching people in your country. However, over the last 10 years, we observed that a lot of assassinations occurred precisely on American soil. So those people who were inconvenient for Putin, they were killed here, in Washington, D.C., by the way, also. And those assassinations that he embarked on in Europe, this is just commonplace. They're all over the place in Europe, and you know what happened with those poisoning operations with a lot of people. The best example is Alexander Litvinenko, who was poisoned in London, right, with polonium. So be careful what kind of tea you drink. So I mean, but unfortunately, we began to see these dynamics that he kills people here, meaning the FSB on his orders. So I'm not sure about this sort of agreement between two intels. Then, of course, bribery, blackmailing of federal officials, and energy and economic warfare. This is just one of those tools of non-conventional warfare that the FSB uses. Now, why this propaganda and disinformation was sort of took the first place, bless you. Because if you remember, and this is a very famous sort of quotation from the right hand of Hitler, right Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, let me control the media and I will turn any nation into a herd of pigs. And by the way, Putin appreciated his talents and he publicly suggested it at some point. Because propaganda is very powerful, and we shouldn't overlook the influence of disinformation or propaganda. It really works. And we have to be very, very careful and very, very knowledgeable to distinguish between the reality and some kind of parallel reality that is being created right in front of our eyes by Russian intel. This is just sort of a statement that I think about constantly when I write something, when I publish something. And if we have a narrative which is being enforced and reinforced through social media platforms, in the conversations with our friends who are influenced by Russian propaganda or might be influenced, when we hear this particular one narrative through the mass media, we read newspapers, right? And if we are hearing this over and over and over again, something just sort of falls on at the bottom of our brain and it stays there. And we begin to doubt or to think maybe there is just sort of something is there. We have to think more about this. So, I mean, the power of a narrative, whether it is a political narrative or whether it is just a historical narrative, it's absolutely huge. Again, we shouldn't overlook this particular tool when people try to enforce this narrative through a variety of methods and ways, and we are hearing all the time. We are exposed to this, and this is dangerous. And those people who create these narratives, they have power over us, clearly. Okay. Trying. Okay, let me just go back. So we know that Putin likes to present himself as a great historian. And he constantly tries to, during these rare moments, especially most recently, when he gives some kind of interviews, he tries to suggest that, first of all, you have to listen to me. My version of world history and of regional history is right. And the most sort of, again, recent example is what he tried to suggest or to explain to those people who interview him is just Ukrainian history from his point of view. So we hear these narratives all over the place, over and over again, and one of them is Ukraine is an artificial creation. Of course, there is no such thing as Ukrainian nation, and it's an old narrative. It's an old narrative. As soon as Putin realized that the West doesn't give any, doesn't address the problem of Russia's invasion of Georgia, which was solved on the Russian Federation, he moved forward. And then he began to prepare the ground for invading Ukraine. And that's why it happened precisely at the Bucharest summit 2008. Everything was already sort of designed, if you will. He wanted to maintain and continues to want it, to maintain his spheres of interest or influence. So the second narrative is, of course, Ukraine is a failed state. And most recent narrative is Ukraine is a Nazi state because it was hijacked by the Nazis, and we have to do something about it because Ukraine is our neighbor. Ukraine suppresses the rights of Russian-speaking people. It's interesting, but completely untrue. Because as you might know, Ukraine was Russified, heavily Russified. My father was a Ukrainian poet, but my mother was a Russian-speaking person. And both of them created sort of a linguistic and some sort of conceptual dissonance in my head when I was growing up. Ukrainian, Russian. So I grew up in between two languages, using both. And that was actually the goal of the Soviet Union, to create a sort of union in which all people would be Russified and Sovietized, right? So, but it's interesting that our law in Ukraine stipulates that both languages are allowed, no discrimination against the Russian language. It cannot be allowed in the governmental settings, which is normal, because imagine if you go to any federal agency here and suddenly you are forced to, not forced, but you are encouraged to use some kind of other language. It would be very strange. So in Ukraine, it's the same. We require people to know Ukrainian, and if you are in a federal setting, so please use Ukrainian. But nevertheless, what I'm trying to tell you that no discrimination was even visible, but that was just a wonderful excuse for Putin to invade Ukraine to begin with. And it's similar to, if you remember what Hitler suggested, why we invaded Czechoslovakia in 1938, because they suppressed and oppressed those people who speak German ethnic people. So, I mean, similar approach, so nothing new here about it. Jumping. Then another narrative, which is rather common from the mouth of Putin, of course, Ukrainians and Russians are the same people, far from that. By the way, I'm very offended when someone calls me Russian. I'm not Russian, especially now. So, but what I'm trying to tell you, the cultural roots are absolutely different. Someone recently, and I like this expression a lot, someone recently said that the Russia, I cannot say the Russian Federation because it's a newly created country after 1991, but Russia, or the Russian Empire, or Russia, stole Ukrainian history before they stole Ukrainian territories. So the Russian Empire tried to appropriate Ukrainian history, to claim that Russia has a beautiful historical legacy and roots in the Kievan Rus. It's a lengthy conversation. I might elaborate if you are interested at the end of our meeting, but it's just not true. We have to understand that this is these peoples, the Ukrainians and the Russians, are very, very different in terms of culture, in terms of language. I understand the Russians, by the way, linguistically, of course, because we were Russified. But if I speak Ukrainian, most Russians cannot understand the Ukrainian language. They are unintelligible, these two languages. So despite the fact that Putin argues otherwise. Another narrative is that Russia, in all this that we have today, Russia is an innocent victim. So if you are against the Russian Federation for whatever reason, you are a Russophobe. So we have to watch for those Russophobes, because actually we are a victim because NATO expanded and Ukraine and NATO conspired very soon to attack us. So basically that's another narrative, an absolutely ridiculous narrative, but that's what he is trying to suggest to the world in order to justify his invasion. This is a very interesting quotation from Putin. Of course, we understand that the Russians are guilty of this sort of, I would say, of having this, adopting this Russian exceptionalism approach, right? But at the same time, we have to know that Putin went much further. I mean, he suggested that the Russians have a specific, a very unique genetic code. Imagine that. So, and it was just pronounced, uttered, formulated in 2014 when he invaded Ukraine for the first time. First he annexed Crimea in 2014, and then he attacked the eastern part of Ukraine called the Donbass. So, especially if we compare the Russian genetic code with the so-called Western genetic code, we are very, very different. We have not only a genetic code that differs from that of the West, but we are very unique in terms of our mission. We have a special mission to bring peace, etc., and all this noble notions suddenly we hear all the time from Putin himself and from his circle, actually, people who are very close to him. Another two very famous quotations, and they sort of contribute to our understanding of what Putin is after and what he thinks about this part of the world in which he lives and about the West. The disintegration of the USSR was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century, 2005. So I'll tell you that all those former Soviet republics were absolutely delighted when finally they gained independence and sovereignty after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So you cannot just really force someone to stay in this marriage if a person doesn't want to be married to you. So my point is that this quotation is mentioned all over. I mean, in all scholarly books, no matter where what you read, this quote will be there. And the second one is no less famous. Russia will follow its own path to democracy. Once Putin was asked, okay, we see that after 1993 you had some kind of this desire to become a democratic country. The United States helped a lot the Russian Federation specifically to get on its feet, but after 1993, the United States began to observe different development. So even Yeltsin, who was just the president of the Russian Federation, a liberal, he began to exhibit some kind of authoritarian features. And by the way, Yeltsin was the person who appointed, if you will, Putin, the president of Russia. Later he was elected, but still he was sick, and he suggested that that's the person. So please, he didn't serve his last term, and Putin became ultimately the president because he was appointed by Yeltsin. But Putin was asked many times, so we began to observe some authoritarian trends in your state. And that's what Putin suggested. It's not your democracy, it's our democracy, and you have to accept what we are trying to achieve here. So we are following our own path to democracy. It's very unique again. So all these narratives, most recently were formulated and uttered again in his interview with Tucker Carlson, or to Tucker Carlson, right, in February 2024. And I would like to mention here that when you know how Putin operates, you have to understand he doesn't give any interviews to people who do not share his views. So, and Trudeau most recently suggested that all those people, including, unfortunately, Tucker Carlson, are being paid. Just we have to accept this sort of, by the way, you can be paid in a variety of ways. It's not about only the money. So, but we will talk about this later, but I want you to remember about this particular sort of approach, Putin's approach to those people who he respects and those people who share his views. The last slide for this session, and then we will have a break. You might ask me, what are those roots? I mean, of Putin's vision, of this particular ideology, of this particular authoritarian approach to anything, if you will, not only to his foreign policy, but also to domestic affairs. First of all, we shouldn't omit this particular name of Alexander Dugin, who had a tremendous, enormous influence on Putin. He is an ideologist, actually, who adopted, I would say, near-fascist ideology, and it's enough to, probably it would be sufficient to mention only one quotation from Dugin. The Ukrainians are fascists. Go and kill, kill, and kill. All right, so just I'm quoting word for word. So, and he was kind of very kind to Putin, and Putin was very kind to him. And he miraculously defended his PhD thesis and had all kinds of gifts from Putin, raising from God knows whom to the position in the very famous Moscow University, the Moscow State University, to the position of a person who dictates how the university should formulate its own policies. So you have to be aware of this particular name. And of course, Putin was raised in the Soviet Union. There is no such thing as a former KGB officer, Soviet ideology, KGB ideology, it's all there. So this is another route. And finally, Soviet intel practices. He cannot deviate from his course. He's just very persistent in what he does and how he does it and what his goals potentially might be in the future. So thank you for listening. And we're taking a break, right? Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. All right, we are going to take a break. We're going to take 10 minutes. If you would like to participate in either the Intergenerational Book Club or Tech Tips for Senior classes, you may sign up at the welcome table. Both of these programs are free for life at TU members. We would also love for you to pick up a flyer for the Off Our Rockers Senior Chorus at the Ritz Theater on Wednesday, November 6th. The Rockers will start off the show, followed by the Nathan Santos Quartet with Olivia Van Gore on vocals. They will be playing music from the American Songbook, including songs made famous by Ella Fitzgerald, Frank Sinatra, and more. It's going to be a fantastic show, and we hope you'll be there. Have a good break. We'll see you back in 10 minutes.